everyone, and very, very welcome to today's panels, Building Bridges in AI Policy, Part 1. I'm very glad to have all the experts here. I see the online experts have joined us as well. A warm welcome to them. I will start off with a few housekeeping items, reiterate what Aisha has already said at the beginning. This panel is scheduled from now to about 10:40. We're going to have a few Q&As at the last 5 to 10 minutes of our panel. Also, if you're joining us online, and I heard that many of you are joining us online, please make use of the chat. There are chat moderators that are taking care of taking your questions, and we'll have a few at the very end of this panel. And it's now a huge pleasure for me to turn to the excellent panelists that we have here. I will just introduce them very briefly. They have all of them have an extensive CV, and the CV is to be found on the website. So in all brevity, very, very quickly, joining us online, he's the Director of Information Society and Action Against Crime at Council of Europe. It is Jan Kleijssen. Welcome, Jan, and let's just make sure that we can hear you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you.
Good morning, we can hear you. Everything is working very well. Joining us online as well, he's Member of Parliament of the Rajya Sabha, the Council of State of the Government of India. He's National Spokesperson and Head of the IT wing of the BJD party. It is Amar Patnaik. Welcome, Amar. Can you hear us?
Thank you so much. Yes, I can hear you. Great to be here. I'm joining from...
Excellent, thank you. And we can hear you as well. Very glad that everything is working very, very fine. Now, to my right and to your left, I will start with the very left for you. I had to think on which side you're looking at me. She is an AI policy program manager at Meta. It's the company known for owning Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, amongst others. It is Antonella Zarra. Very nice to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And sound is working as well, so that's good. We have, he's a PhD candidate in African Studies as a Meta Research PhD fellow at Harvard University. It is Bulelani Jili. Very welcome to you. Good to have you here. And finally, he's professor and director of the Manipal Law School. It is Avinash Dadhich. Welcome to you. Excellent. Now, let's start this panel proper. I'm already had a little glimpse of your expertise when we had a short coffee before starting this conference, and I know that you're ready to get started. The theme of this panel is building bridges in AI policy. And one question is, why should we even build bridges in AI policy? And two ideas that might be of help for the course of this panel. The first one actually coming from this very building comes from science and technology studies that teaches that any technical solution is necessarily shaped by the social environment in which it is created. So therefore, technology is a carrier of values, of social values, and it is right to ask ethical questions with respect to the use of technology. And the second idea is that technology is highly globalized and supply chains are diverse and global. It's therefore important to consider AI policy from a global perspective. So maybe these are two guiding ideas that can help us throughout this panel. There seem to be ethical questions to be asked about the use of AI, and this is typically where the legislator wants to enter the scene, but the legislator is not one harmonized body around the world. And that brings me actually to my very first questions, and I would direct that question to you, Antonella. Can you explain us a little bit what you're doing at Meta, what Meta is doing, and with respect to AI and AI policy, and most specifically, how Meta is dealing with the challenges of globalized supply chains, also globalized delivery of services, as it were, and the possibly scattered and regional national laws.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Boris, for this interesting inputs. Let me also thank the organizers, Aisha and all the ATH team, as well as RegHorizon, for organizing this very interesting panel. So I will focus my intervention on two main things. First of all, the first one being how Meta is building a bridge between tech and policy through policy experimentation and our flagship initiative, Open Loop. The second one on how stakeholder engagement is really important to ensure that AI policy is effective. At Meta, as you know, AI is an essential part of how we show people the content that matters to them and how we keep them safe when using our product. Meta's AI models perform trillions of operations every day to more than billions of people that use our technologies. However, as you said, technologies pose many challenges and are very dynamic and complex by nature, especially AI. So also regulating technology and AI is complex. We think that the most important and problematic challenge is the uncertainty around both the technology and the policy. So at Meta, we started asking, how can we make sure to unleash innovation and allow for experimentalism to enter the scene and create more effective policy making in the field of emerging technologies? We think that experimentation is the solution to these challenges, to the uncertainties of tech and to the uncertainties of regulating tech. And by experimentation, I mean, think of regulatory sandboxes, policy prototyping exercises, test beds for autonomous vehicles, for instance. So informing the policy discussion with more evidence-based inputs. And we think that the experimentation can lead to three main shifts: from outpaced to anticipatory policymaking, to top-down to from top-down to stakeholder inclusive policymaking, and from piecemeal to holistic policymaking. These shifts, we think, are crucial and can be achieved by means of policy experimentation. So we created Open Loop, an initiative that was launched in 2021, last year, which is a global initiative that runs policy prototyping program and aims to co-create and test the effect of AI policies before they are enacted. Policy prototyping programs can be run with any policy or governance framework. Anything that is normative in nature can be tested in a controlled environment by a selected number of norm addressees, of course. Let me tell you how this works and how we run these programs globally. First of all, we gather the main players, let's say, of the AI landscape, tech companies. Most of them are startups. We typically work with cohorts of 10 to 50 startups. And we ask them to reflect upon and test within their business model and their AI models the effects of some regulation that affect them. For instance, in Europe, we are running a policy prototyping program on the AI Act with more than 50 companies. Those companies are asked to reply to the clarity, the technical feasibility, the operationality of the requirements of the proposal. And we call this a policy prototype, a normative framework. Then we contribute to the policy discussion by improving and providing policy recommendation to the regulator. And we do so not in a vacuum, but in a consortium. We partner with policymakers, we partner with academia, and we partner with civil society organizations as well. For instance, in India, we kicked off this week our program, and then this leads me to the second part of my intervention on stakeholder engagement. So we are testing with a number of startups in India, and we had a roundtable this week in New Delhi, the importance of local factors when implementing AI principle and the principle of human centricity. How can this be applied to the local context? So we are running these roundtables, and we are asking companies that are working on agriculture, health, education, to test the policy prototype that we prepared and assess how stakeholders can be engaged in the development of their system. So we are talking about two types of stakeholder engagement. One in the creation of the prototype, the other one in the development of the technology itself. And I will conclude by stating that with this attempt, we try to be an ally to the regulator. We are looking for regulatory partners, but also scholars that are active at the forefront of tech, society, and law to build better and more effective policies together. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That brings me actually straight to Bulelani, and one of your research interests include Africa-China relations, and especially with respect to the use of surveillance technology. Now, based on what we've just heard from Antonella, is it fair to say that you have observed a few implementation of technology that did not went through a sandbox and did not went through stakeholder engagement? Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, sure. But first, I'd like to also kind of thank the organizers that are here today with us in this room, but also to everybody else who has made this possible. Thank you for their help, but also, thank you for your ears. I think it is a kind of a correct characterization in terms of the general exclusion of all the necessary stakeholders. But to kind of first I guess contextualize this general statement. Much of my work really looks into the distribution of Chinese surveillance technologies, with a special attention to AI surveillance technologies in the global south, with a general prioritization of kind of Kenya and Ethiopia as kind of really cases to kind of think more actively about not only what are Chinese companies doing, like Huawei in the global south, but also how are these kind of local actors also integrating these technologies to support local initiatives. Much of the general literature on this topic generally presupposes a couple of axes. One of the kind of main general tenets of the literature, argues that effectively the distribution of Chinese AI surveillance technologies leads to the further exacerbation of kind of either local environments or simply kind of the backslide of democracy. And so much of my work really kind of takes that as the general, launch pad for much of my research. And when you kind of look into this, subject more carefully, what becomes evidently clear is that it's not simply important to think about the supply side of things, i.e., China's own kind of, let's say, geopolitical ambitions and the distribution of surveillance technologies into the global south. And we could kind of rat on about as to exactly why China and its companies are distributing these technologies. It's also important to really think through how our local stakeholders integrating these technologies into their own kind of public security systems. And what is clear is that when a lot of these kind of countries, and particularly in the global south, are taking on some of these surveillance technologies, they're doing it with the general intentions, both of developmental ambitions, but more importantly, concerns around crime and terror. But they usually land in political and legal environments that don't necessarily always have robust data protection measures in mind. And so my work in particular is really thinking more kind of on the ground and actively about, what does robust data protection measures look like in the context of low-income countries that have specific challenges that are not simply contingent on whether or not they have the law, in the books, but also, sometimes the technical difficulties of simply not having the necessary expertise to support their general ambitions, even if the law in itself is there. But also, more importantly, also thinking about, the AI technologies themselves. I think, one of the earlier comments today, really aim to establish that, the application of AI is not always an exacerbating factor in the negative sense. It can sometimes necessarily support, localized ambitions. So then thinking with that in mind, what does it also mean then to think about, AI being applied in the most appropriate means in these contexts. And so I'll kind of leave my opening remarks there, and I kind of hope to elaborate later on some of my findings.
We'll certainly get back to that. Thank you very much. You brought up quite a few item points that I think is worthwhile discussing later. I'll turn to you, Avinash, and we've heard that technology has an impact on society. We've also heard just in the presentation before that technology is also more and more coming into the working field of lawyers. And I was wondering, how fit for purpose is law to mitigate unwanted impacts on society, and how fit are lawyers nowadays? Do we actually even have to change the curriculum in our law schools? What do you think of that?
Okay, so basically you have two questions.
That's true.
First, I will talk about the law and society, and how law can help to protect the society. Yeah, and second about the law school. Yeah, am I clear? So the first thing, we have created rules and regulations basically to protect the society. But this society, I think that's important, because now we are living in a very interesting era where countries more and more they are going for deglobalization, and the corporates and individuals and civil society they are looking for more globalization. Okay, so these technological platforms, they have opened the gates, national boundaries, they really don't matter anymore. So this is an interesting time. How to make a balance in it? When you talk about society, then the first question is, do really society worry about these concerns? If we see in history, laws have failed to protect environment. When we were implementing technologies to produce more, nobody talked about their impact on the environment that time. And now we are talking about the climate change or global warming. We are trying to make some laws now. Nobody talked about that time. Same thing with the food laws. When we needed more food, especially in developing countries, less developing countries, or even developed countries also, what type of food we are having now, and what are the negative impact of that food on people's life, or even on the climate? We never talked about these issues. So more or less laws are reactive. Okay, and I think this is the general trend. But now the most important question is that when we talk about the AI, will we have time after 10, 20, 30 years to see the negative impact or the ethical or the other negative dimensions of AI? So that's a one point. Do really society worry about it? I don't think so. In developing countries, I am talking from the developing countries point of view, when people are looking for their basic amenities and entertainment, some basic services, these technologies are providing good help. So in that environment, if you start talking about that, how to create rules, regulations to regulate these technologies without the support of the common man or the people, because ultimately laws are coming from parliament or by judiciary. So when the judiciary and the politicians are not forced by people to create some ecosystem, it's difficult to create an ecosystem. That's a point number one. Who is responsible to do this? Politicians? I don't think so, because it's not really much concern. I think the civil society, academicians, and I believe that now the corporation should take the lead. Because what we have seen in last 500 years, most of the big changes or the intellectual changes, they came from the corporates. I think the first time in history when we are observing that the big corporate houses, their employees are revolting. Like for example, Google employees, they said, no, we won't take this Chinese project because this is anti-human. I think this happened first time in openly a big corporate guys, they said, no, we don't do it. I think we need to bring more democracy and more discussions in the corporates, and we need to make them more not accountable, because when you call them accountable, it means that they are doing something wrong. They are not doing anything wrong. They are just doing their business. And this is how business works. So I think we need to have more dialogue with corporates, with open mind and open heart, because we have a lot of suspicion. We believe that these guys are evil. If they are evil, then why we are using their technology? We can stop it. No, we don't want to stop it, but we want to abuse them. I think this is a time to have a honest discussion. This is the only way we can protect our society. That's the first point. Open discussion, honest discussion, without accusing anyone, because we like to throw balls. The government says that these corporate houses are bad. Corporate says that government is over-regulating our innovation process. Okay, and the people really, they don't care. Okay, very few people they talk about these issues. Okay, maybe they will talk about after 10, 15 years, 20 years, but not now. So that's a opening remark. Second, about the law school, I think I agree with Professor that yes, the technology can help the lawyers, the legal ecosystem, judicial system, law enforcement system. AI can help a lot, but at the same time, we should not forget that AI is not coming from space. AI is nothing but a reflection of our human society. So whatever database we have right now, they are having a lot of bias and unethical dimensions. So if you use the same historical database and create those technologies and use them, so you are bringing basically humans in digital space. So we need to be very, very careful that we cannot rely on these technologies like with something that they are miracle. No, they are not miracle. The empirical data has been very clear in USA, especially the AI technologies have been used in a very negative way against some minority communities. Okay, so my understanding is that when we use technology in a very sensitive area like the justice, because justice is the foundation of society. Once we lose our faith in justice system, then I don't know what we will have. So when we use technologies in judicial system, in legal education or law enforcement system, we have to be very, very careful. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's quite interesting what we just heard, deglobalization versus globalization. And I want to turn to Amar. Amar, India is a big country with a very large population and certainly also a very diverse levels of digital literacy. Now, you have a very interesting job, and I lift my hat for the challenges you face. And now we heard that the challenges are both national, deglobalized, and also globalized. And what do you think? What do you think of all this, and what do you think your work is contributing for the Indian society? What are you doing?
Thank you so much. I heard very intently what Antonella was saying and Avinash was saying, a lot of reference to India. I was a member of the Joint Parliamentary Committee that was looking into a privacy law in India. We spent about 2 years on that, but then subsequently withdrawn to be reintroduced in a different manner. Why it was decided to reintroduce the bill was largely from the point of view of 2 aspects. One, which you mentioned, the huge digital inequity in a country like India. We must be mindful of the fact that about 40% of rural India doesn't have internet in a qualitative internet. Some people have to climb to trees to get the internet signal. About 25% do not have access to smartphones. So in a sense, what happens is the fact that they might be getting services because of use of AI, because of innovation, and it is good so long as it is good, so long as it is delivering the benefits. But if the data is used for purposes which results intentionally or unintentionally to create harm to them, then you can imagine the kind of, it's not just a question of a complaint, it's a question of almost a small amount of, a small version of riot that happens because people may have lost money, people may have lost their belongings, people may have lost their houses, people may have lost their families. Some people may have even got their data used for purposes which causes harm to their families. So I think the big question in technology per se, adoption of technology per se, and diffusion of technology, not just AI, in India, which is a prime concern for us legislators while passing any tech law in India, is this issue of digital inequity. Since technology has been used largely in India currently for financial in fintech, there's been a massive growth of fintech, particularly after the lockdown, COVID-induced lockdown. So there again, the digital inequity and digital inequity is exacerbated by financial illiteracy. So these two components are very important, which is to be addressed. And therefore, I was very happy when Antonella talked about, co-creation, stakeholders consultation. But are those stakeholders being consulted who are definitely reaping the benefits now? As Avinash said, they are reaping the benefits now, so they're not really bothered. But once a harm is caused to them, then it actually explodes in a country like India. And a small number is a huge number by any standard globally. And that creates a problem for governments, that creates a problem for the local self-governments. And then the allegation is largely that government is supposed to be the trustee of the people, a welfare state, and the government did not take care. So I think in the diffusion of AI and bridging the gap between countries, across jurisdictions, I do fully agree that there is a need for international order on this, a global order in this. This is what our finance minister has said, and all international for IMF, World Bank, and elsewhere. And I have also mentioned it both in Parliament and outside while writing. But the fact is, within the country itself, intra-country adoption of technology, AI-based technology, it is beneficial for agriculture, beneficial for health systems, beneficial for rural development, but then the harm aspect has to be considered, and that has to be very transparent. The people have to be told. Many of the times the people are not told, and therefore they need for a very robust privacy law in our country. Now, privacy has been accepted by our Supreme Court 2 years ago as a fundamental right. And therefore, if it is a fundamental right, it is constitutionally guaranteed to them, then it is the duty of the government to protect against these harms, protect against violation of this fundamental right. And therefore, when we are discussing this entire issue of bridging the gap, I'm sure that co-creation is extremely important, but then the right stakeholders have to be consulted. I'm very happy that she talked about startups being consulted, the carve-outs to be made out for them, the regulatory sandboxes to be provided by various regulators. But I think the people who are currently reaping the benefit, they are not being adequately consulted. And this is where we come in as responsible legislators while enacting the laws in India. And for example, I'll say, we talked about the crypto regulation. We were going a little far. We talked because the young crowd wanted this, but then we didn't really adequately inform them about the challenge, about the risks that they would be dabbling in, and that's where our role came in. And I think now we decided that the government of India, the central bank, will first introduce the CBDC, and then we will think about how to allow private virtual assets to come in, and then we'll be able to make a regulation for them. But the fact is that even if we don't regulate for them, the market can still exist, as you know. It crosses boundaries. The nation states currently, because of internet and because of blockchain technologies, have lost significance as far as technology is concerned. And therefore, we as a country, both the executive side, the government and the Parliament have been insisting, and I have personally been insisting, on a global order to be decided, a principle-based order, let's say purpose limitation, collection limitation, data minimization, proportionality. All these have to be first decided, and let the countries, individual countries, then get down to making separate laws to give privacy to the citizens. This is one aspect. The second aspect that I would like to talk about is the fact that as Avinash was saying, that if you are using a lot of data which the machine learns from, then the data is also importing a lot of the discrimination that was there in society before. In a country like India, these discriminations have been across several bases, and therefore these discriminations, if they get imported into future innovation, then those discriminations get actually deepened. So one has to be mindful of that as well. Lastly, I would like to say that just you talked about science, technology studies. You are also aware that the social construction of technology by Willy Bijker from Netherlands, when he talked about society itself, influencing the way technology is developed, is equally important. And if we push down from top these benefits, then it's only a section of the people who get the benefits. The large section of people may not get that benefit, and those discrimination can be actually perpetuated or deepened because of these innovations. I think my concern on data, the use of data, and AI using that data, which results in harm probably when not handled properly, intentionally and unintentionally. And second, the denial of service because of the way regulation is made or the way the algorithms are designed is something which are matters of concern when we are discussing about the proliferation of AI in the world, and in particular in India. There is no denying the fact that the benefits are immense. There is no denying the fact that it would decrease the transaction cost in several things, improve the lives of people, but we have to be also mindful of the context in which it is operating, which is digital inequity, financial illiteracy, access to internet itself, access to devices in which they can take advantage of these applications.
I will turn to Jan. Jan, it sounds like the multilateral approach is conducive to best addressing regulation in AI. We've heard from the national approach. We've also heard that not only legislators are in charge, but there should be some sort of multi-stakeholder approach to AI policy. Would you like to introduce us to your work and to the work of the Council of Europe with that respect?
Thank you very much. Yes, with great pleasures, and very warm good morning or good afternoon to you from Strasbourg. I represent the Council of Europe, and just to a few words by way of explanation, it is an organization very distinct from the European Union, with which it is often confused, also because of the terminology used. The Council of Europe is Europe's oldest multilateral organization, political organization, founded in 1949, with the aim of preventing the horrors of World War II from recurring. Our founding fathers include, and mothers include, Winston Churchill, de Gasperi, etc. The aim of the organization is to prevent these horrors from recurring by promoting and protecting human rights, rule of law, and democracy, the holy trinity of the Council of Europe, if you so wish. And we've been doing this since 1949 through multilateral legal instruments, in particular treaties, Council of Europe treaties. The best known on the European continent is the European Convention on Human Rights, which has a court that can deliver binding decisions upon individual applications against governments. Now, the Council of Europe realized very early on that in order to ensure protection of human rights, rule of law, and democracy, new technological developments had to be taken into account and had to be addressed. Therefore, 41 years ago, the Council of Europe established the world's first treaty on data protection. And that came at a time when very few countries around the world, if any, had any data protection legislation. And this treaty, this convention, Convention 108, as it is known, and some of you may be familiar with it, shaped national legislations, not only in Europe, but across the world. There are currently more than 56 parties to the convention, and we cooperate with more than 70 countries on a regular basis in the field of data protection. Now, 21 years ago, the Council of Europe established the world's first treaty, and to this day, the world's only treaty against cybercrime. And that treaty now has 67 ratifying states that have ratified parties. Nigeria joined just 3 weeks ago as the 67th party. We have state parties on all 5 continents. And I'm mentioning this because I'll come, of course, to AI in a moment, how regional organizations like the Council of Europe can make a contribution to setting global standards. Not only do we have 67 state parties to this particular convention on cybercrime across 5 continents, but last year we were present and we assisted in capacity building in more than 140 countries around the world. Now, of course, this is not every state, it's not the entire community of states, but I would venture here that 140 states is already a considerable global community. Artificial intelligence, and I could not agree more with the previous speaker also to say that it can be hugely beneficial. It will bring fantastic advantages, and you're all aware of that. But it also carries risks. And allow me just 2 or 3 minutes to explain to you a demonstration of that risk that sadly occurred in my country of origin, the Netherlands, over the past years, where the tax authorities used an AI system to detect fraud with regard to child benefits. The aim was very laudable. Fraud had been detected with regard to the social services, with regard to particular family allowances and child benefits, and the aim was to reduce this. A system was deployed and the results were catastrophic. Over 26,000 people were wrongly and completely unjustifiably identified as having defrauded the system. They had to pay back the benefits they had received over years. This meant that many livelihoods were destroyed. Lives were lost because people committed suicide because of the stress and this enormous financial pressure they were put under. Over 1,600 children were taken away from their parents and have still not been reunited with their families. The judiciary failed to address this issue because the computer said it was okay. And the president of our highest administrative tribunal publicly apologized on television for the miscarriage of justice. The government had to resign. And the crisis is, as I said, the children have still not been returned. The consequences of this are still being felt. The important lesson to draw from this, as was pointed out by the Council of Europe's main advisory body, we have an advisory body on rule of law matters and constitutional issues called the Venice Commission, made up of many former ministers of justice, prime ministers, eminent constitutionalists, and they work incidentally in over 60 countries in the world. An opinion on this scandal was delivered in October 2021, which makes for interesting reading, and you can find it on the Council of Europe website, Venice Commission, Netherlands, October 21. On this scandal, the Venice Commission pointed out that part of the problem was the insufficient governance of AI. What it also pointed out is that what happened in the Netherlands could easily happen elsewhere, not only in Europe, but around the world. Because when governments place a high trust in AI systems without the necessary checks, without thoroughly checking the data for bias, without competent human oversight, without a judiciary that is aware that technology can get it wrong, that the computer can get it wrong, that automated systems make wrong assessments because of the bias that's in the data, because they don't see the bigger picture, and of course because AI systems do not have any empathy. had this assessment been made by humans. The fact that all those suspected of fraud came from a migrant background and all lived in particular areas, all of them should have given rise to questioning and to challenging the results. But a blind faith existed in the automated system. Of course, lessons are now being drawn from this. And in the Council of Europe, we, over the past 2 years, we have done two things. First of all, we looked at existing ethical frameworks and existing legislation to determine whether there was need for more, whether we do need international law to address this issue. And we did so in a committee that was composed of our 46 member states, but also of our 5 observer states, namely the United States, Canada, Mexico, Japan, the Holy See, and the government of Israel, which requested to be admitted to these consultations. The answer was unanimous. There are important gaps. Of course, we have the Data Protection Convention. There's national legislation that's in some cases already deals with these issues, but there are important gaps in legal protection. And the tragedy in the Netherlands is an example of that. Secondly, we examined the provisions, the elements that a future treaty could have, and these were presented December last year. On that basis, the governments of the Council of Europe, the 46 governments, now 46, because the Council of Europe expelled the Russian Federation after its aggression in February, which started in February and is sadly still going on against Ukraine. So now 46 governments decided to launch negotiations on what we hope will be the world's first treaty on artificial intelligence and human rights, along the pioneering lines I mentioned earlier: data protection 41 years ago, cybercrime, and now 21 years ago, and now artificial intelligence. And we were given a very short deadline to negotiate this. Because of the urgency, and it is really urgent because the systems are increasingly being used by governments, public authorities at all levels, and without adequate governance, the technology does carry huge risks. The draft treaty should be ready by the middle of November next year. So basically a year and a half to negotiate, which is extraordinarily short if you consider that most negotiations in the UN context on treaties take at least 10 years. So we are working very hard on this together with our partners in other international organizations, such as UNESCO, OECD, of course also the European Union, which is working on its own EU AI Act, which also concerns a number of human rights provisions, but where the basic starting point is to have proper products, a market regulation, safe products, whereas for the Council of Europe, it is to ensure that those that use artificial intelligence tick a number of boxes to make sure that fundamental rights are respected and that the technology is used for the good and not to harm. Stakeholders were mentioned by several speakers. We're very pleased that important companies such as Meta, but also some 26 others, the bigger companies, the very big companies, but also associations of smaller companies, of telcos, of standard setters, such as IEEE, are also sitting at the table, in addition to civil society, which also participates in our discussions to ensure that we get the broadest possible consensus on the elements that should be in a binding treaty, not just left to ethical self-regulation, ethical charters, self-regulation, but a binding international treaty, which we hope will become a global standard as the other treaties I have mentioned. We very much welcome, of course, any input that can be given, such as a conference as this, and I look very much forward to your comments and input. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. I think I would like to open up the discussion for sure, and then you'll always free to chip in at any moment you want. And I think we can continue with the theme of stakeholder engagement, because that's something that really reunites all 5 experts here. And I thought to start off with you, Bulelani, and ask you again, in the course of your studies, what have you observed? What do you think went wrong, and what do you think people or governments or who else should learn from it? Maybe let's start from there.
Oh yeah, sure. So once again, trying to kind of contextualize the nature of the work as it relates to currently where the field is, but then also to try and give somewhat of a very specific example in terms of what happens when you effectively use AI surveillance technologies. Let's use a technical term, willy-nilly. What exactly happens? Currently, if you kind of look into the literature that kind of documents AI surveillance technologies into the global south, with a special attention to Chinese AI surveillance technologies, most people generally estimate that about 63 countries in the global south have generally adopted Chinese surveillance technologies. And those general technologies, are used for a variety both of kind of administrative and public security purposes. In the specific context of, say, the countries that I focus on, say Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia, these technologies have been mostly integrated with the ostensible purposes of, supporting crime and terror concerns. And those seems quite plausible, specifically when you're thinking about some of the kind of domestic challenges around those areas. But, when these technologies are being integrated, firstly, specifically in the context of Uganda, civil society in itself was not at the table. The Chinese companies that were particularly working with the government were not particularly asking questions as to exactly how these technologies will be used. And we've had particular cases of, political opposition being arrested and being identified by these technologies, and effectively supporting certain governments, and in particular, that state in kind of suppressing, democratic participation and activity from the opposition. And so when you're thinking about that particular example, one can obviously point to a factor that, an absence of, multi-stake partners were not particularly involved in that example. But for me, what is also particularly important is to really think through about how the exportation of certain technologies don't always travel with the values of those companies or the countries in which they're being sourced from. Much of the general literature on this topic generally draws attention to the fact that China, particularly China and its companies, are interested in somewhat being more involved in the normative shaping of kind of cyberspace and technology, but they begin to also to ignore how localized political factors might also mediate general outcomes. And much of my work in particular is interested not simply in thinking through which companies or which countries are sourcing these technologies, but also in thinking through, well, what does it then mean to try and build robust measures in more kind of challenging legal environments like Uganda, where sometimes the application of these technologies may not always necessarily have, the best intentions in mind, even when they ostensibly come under, the appropriate interest of, supporting crime reduction and so forth.
I had when I read your article, I remember that one of your claims was to actually implement and enforce data protection measures. And I remember Amar also mentioning some aspects of data protection and also data quality. And I thought it's worthwhile asking Jan the following question. The Council of Europe already has, as you pointed out, data protection regulation in place. What do you see, or how did you come to the point that you see there is a need for something on top of data protection to regulate AI? Where is the gap?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. data are an element of AI governance, but are only an element. For instance, awareness raising, human oversight with regard to its use, proper training already earlier on. A colleague from UNESCO pointed out the importance of training civil servants, so ensure that the state administration is aware of that. The fact that people should be informed when they're interacting with an AI system. Most of you will be aware of the legislation in California, in the United States, that obliges companies of a certain size to inform their customers when they deal with AI chatbots, for instance. And of course, the same principle, I think, should also apply to governments when they deal with their citizens. The proper testing of systems, the regular control. So there are a whole series of aspects. Very importantly, human rights impact assessment before a government uses an AI system to basically delegate, because that's what it is, delegate to an automated system tasks that traditionally were carried out by human beings. So if authorities decide to delegate that, to make a human rights impact assessment, what the consequences of this could be and how one can mitigate the possible negative effects. Very importantly, I think also to be modest when it comes to prevention, and realize that even with the best precautions, with the greatest care, with the most carefully chosen data for training the systems, even when they're trained in regulatory sandboxes before being rolled out, things can still go wrong and things will go wrong. And therefore, it is important that there is always a remedy, that it is possible that citizens, when AI systems are used by governments, have a possibility to first of all, they must be aware, of course, what's happened, as I said, but that they would have a remedy in order to redress the wrongs that may inadvertently have been caused, despite all the precautions, by even the most sophisticated systems with the best possible data we have. So just a series of examples where gaps are and where we think additional regulation is necessary. Where the jury is still out is on red lines. There seems to be a consensus amongst the parties around the table that issues such as social scoring should not be allowed. Emotional recognition is another one, a hotly contested issue. Certain aspects of facial recognition are being discussed. There's no consensus yet on those, but it is not impossible that in addition, states will, the stakeholders actually, not just the states, because as I said, you mentioned that what unites the 5 speakers is the importance of multi-stakeholder involvement. We really attach great value to that, that we hope to find consensus on what should be the best possible formula for a proper governance of AI. And as I said, based on law, not just on intentions, but based on law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm turning to Antonella now and going back to the stakeholder engagement that you've mentioned early on. And also, again, citing Amar, who asked the question, well, co-creation or stakeholder engagement is good, but are the stakeholder you engage with representative to the entire population? How do you make sure that stakeholder engagement in your work is actually representative?
Thank you for the question. So let me start by saying that we don't aim to have a scientific validity in terms of the programs, but it's really just to start a discussion around who should be in the room. For us, we would like to share the thought that all the stakeholders should be at the table in discussing these technologies and their impact on population, on affected people. That is why we also involve civil society organizations, not only companies, in the co-creation phase of our programs. And also to talk about what Jan just said about the importance of basically building a responsible product. This is what we are investing in. This is what Meta is investing in, building a responsible AI. We have a team that is dedicated to make sure that our products follow not only human rights, but also responsible practice in terms of fairness, robustness, and safety of the models, but also transparency. And maybe let me focus on transparency. And human oversight was also mentioned. In one of our open loop programs in Singapore, we partnered with the Infocom Media Development Authority to test with companies their governance framework on AI explainability. So I think that part of the challenges that AI poses is that companies need to build these responsible tools, right? So we made sure that these startups were confronted with this model governance framework on explainability and implemented explainability measures in their systems. And the results of the program are that after the end of the program, most of companies kept the explainability measures in their systems. And also the authority was capable of improving in this iterative process their governance framework. Transparency is also very important when it comes to end users and AI users or operators that deal with models, for instance. We have developed in that regard system cards, which is an approach, a way to explain how models function to people that deal with the technology. And finally, I don't think AI operators are the only actors that are relevant in this space, right? We also have end users, consumers. We are currently testing the Article 52 of the AI Act on transparency obligations and for users interacting with systems, kind of imagining with the input of our startups how users should be better informed regarding the fact that they're interacting with a bot, for instance, or a virtual assistant. And early findings show that users appreciate to be informed, but not too much, because this would lead to information overload. So this doesn't increase the level of trust and agency they have in the AI system. So this is to say that we really want to be an ally of regulators. We believe that multi-stakeholder engagement is key to enable these policies. And we look forward to potential partnership. We really welcome the initiative of Council of Europe to be a front runner in the human rights aspect of AI. So thank you very much.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much. I'm coming back to you, Avinash, because you mentioned that there's a need for more democracy in cooperation. It sounds like there's a need for a change in incentives for cooperation, but is what Antonella just presented going into the right direction? Is it our cooperation being more democratic in that way?
Okay, so I think when you talk about this bridging the gap, so I think if I say this is the bridge, so on this side, corporations and government, and I think that side, the end users. Okay, so government and corporations, they are already interacting with each other since a long time. This is not happening first time. In the last 20, 30 years, they are interacting with each other. And it's not only AI, they are doing this type of dialogue on various technological issues like the competition law, intellectual property law, money laundering law, banking law. So this is not a new thing, the interface between government and corporates or the regulators or the policymakers. So they know each other very well. They have enough information about each other. So what they are doing, I think it's just like a game, It's like a game they are playing with each other. The issue is the end user, whether he is concerned about that process or not. If you see in last 20 years, how much awareness we have created in public about the abuse or the negative dimensions of these technologies, I think very rarely. Government is not doing it. At least say I'm talking about from the Indian perspective, okay? Because I can't talk from the European or the American perspective. Maybe you guys have done something better. But at least in developing countries, I can say very clearly that government was not very keen to share this information with the people, that these technologies which you are using now, they are very useful. Like the WhatsApp, WhatsApp is very useful, Facebook is useful, Google is useful. It's really empowered people. So people are very happy with these technologies. If you ask any common Indian, what do you think about WhatsApp? He says, I love it. Guys don't pay anything, and it's a very, very easy to use, and I love it. They have family groups, they have friends group, they have alumni groups, and they love it. They love Facebook, they love Google, they love everything about all these emerging technologies. So the issue is that who will tell them? Companies or the government? Governments, they don't have time, resources, or expertise. Okay. The corporates, historically they never did it. No pharmaceutical company informed any people that don't take these medicines, they have anti effects also. uh, Pharmaceutical, chemicals, fertilizers, all these chemical industries, they never informed people about the negative dimensions. uh, but now I think people are out of the government. Some people, not all, but some people, they are self educated, they are self aware, and they are reading about it, and now they are raising these issues, like the ethics of the AI, the transparency in the AI, fairness in the AI. For a layman, it doesn't matter. Like a normal man, why should I care about fairness or transparency in technology? I'm enjoying it. Yeah, this is how it works in life. So my point is that the corporations, I think they should take the lead now. Why? It's a self-interest. Because here we are not talking about technology. We are opposing the business model of these companies, the Google, Facebook, and all these tech companies, the AI based companies. We are challenging their business model. That these regulators, they are challenging their business model. So the dialogue between the corporations and the government is a trade-off. Okay, just making a balance, that you want to do business, you do your business because we want you to do your business. Like for example, in India, data privacy, Supreme Court recognized privacy as a fundamental right of constitution in 2018, and still we are end up in 2022, we don't have any data privacy law. We want a data privacy law at the top level, not at the people don't want it. People are not concerned about their privacy. So there is no political pressure on the government to make a law, but there is a lot of discussion going on within the government that if we have a strict data privacy law, maybe it will hamper our FDI, our growth, our development. At the same time, we need to create some rules and regulation which gives us some protection to our people. So I think there's a lot of conflict within the government. But I think the corporate side, what's my hypothesis, that in the long term, it's in their interest. Because once people will get more awareness, and if there is any political pressure, see, you need to understand politicians normally work under a pressure, because they have to contest elections. So if there is a political pressure from the people that we don't want it, we want to stop it, blah, 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 then very quickly the regulators or the government will take a very hard stand on the business model of these companies. Yeah. And I think that's not a good situation for any corporate. So in the self-interest of these corporations, they should create awareness. Okay. The people should know about their legal, ethical, and all these dimensions. And with a dialogue of people, initially, maybe they will hurt some their business. They have to change some of their business strategies and the way they are running their houses. But in long term, it's in their interest, because I'm very much sure that this model where the governments are deciding things, no, not anymore. In next 10, 15, 20 years, I'm very sure that people, the educated people, aware people like you, they will take control, like what's happening in Iran right now. Okay, we never thought of that one day the women in Iran, they will behave like this. So I think it's a changing scenario, And the government and corporation should understand that if they want a peaceful solution, in a very democratic way solution, this gap, this bridge between the government and corporations, between people, should be filled very quickly. And this should be done by advocacy, awareness, and honest dialogue.
Well, that's very interesting. Thank you very much for that. And I will turn directly to Amar and asking what you think of what we've just heard. So taking the perspective of the end user being very important, and the government being not so important in I put it like this, in AI policy, and corporations being more important going on. What do you think of that? Oh, he has left.
I think both of them.
Possibly away. Both of them? Jan is here, but Amar is not here anymore. Okay, excellent. So Jan is here. Perfect. So Jan is here. Amar is not here anymore. So may I go back to Antonella then and ask you what you think of the claim that it's in the self-interest of technology companies to think or to implement more ethical boundaries?
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, I think we should overcome this top-down approach, and a more inclusive approach to this policy is what is best for the interest of society. We are at the beginning of the AI journey, let's say, so it's better to act together in this respect and create more inclusive and stakeholder engaged environment for policy of AI.
So multilateral organizations such as the Council of Europe being something like the most top-down organization possible, how do you make sure at the Council of Europe that you also have a working stakeholder engagement?
Okay, sorry, there was a small problem with the connection. We've actually established already very early on in the history of the Council of Europe a formal status for NGOs, so to have civil society as a formal stakeholder. And since 2017, we have what we call digital partnerships, companies and associations of companies I mentioned, the private sector, which wishes to commit to help us promote human rights, rule of law and democracy, exchange letters with the Council of Europe, that's the formula, can apply for such a status, and then there is an exchange of letters, and then they become formal digital partners. And Meta, I'm very pleased to note, is one of them, as are Meta's partners, competitors, if you like. We have Microsoft, Google, Apple. We in total, but also a number of smaller European Association of Internet Service Providers, Telefonica, the Lego Group, etc. So they have a formal status, and therefore they are admitted to a number of Council of Europe committees, notably to the committee that negotiates now the AI treaty. They cannot vote, but they can fully participate. They can propose amendments. They can discuss the text. They can make themselves proposals for wording. So they're very, very actively involved. I would make an appeal here to them to be even more involved. Not all companies that we have at the table are equally active. And I think for them, it is a very important opportunity to be able to shape future regulation rules, and to what we also very much hope, of course, I don't think it was mentioned yet, well, it was mentioned, of course, by Meta, but is the integration of all these principles from the very beginning. Human rights should not be an afterthought. It should be there from the design phase. You've heard of privacy by design. Human rights by design is a slightly wider expression of the same idea. Ensure that fundamental rights are taken into account right from the very outset, so that your engineers work hand in hand with the policymakers and draw attention that when you design a system, you should make sure that it is as safe as possible, that it takes a number of human rights principles into account. And please do engage with us. Do engage with us during these negotiations. We have until November 2023, and during this period, your presence, the presence of companies and civil society alike, is essential. So the seat is there. Please take it.
Excellent, thank you very much. We've heard of sandboxes, we've heard of building bridges, and we're all getting a PhD for metaphorical civil engineering for that. Bulelani, I wanted to ask you, it's good to have a bridge, but if everybody just stands on their sides with open arms and saying, you're welcome to come to my side, and nobody crosses the river, somebody needs to make the first step. Who might this be?
Well, in this metaphorical bridge, I'd hope it would be everybody, I guess, willing to kind of actively participate, in the creation of a kind of more inclusive digital inflection point. While being on this panel, I've been thinking more actively about, what does, this kind of multi-stakeholder approach look like in the context of low-income countries in particular, where the general predilection of the application of these technologies has been a general top-down posture, or simply the over participation both of corporations and the government in dictating how these applications should be particularly rolled out. In some of the examples that I've particularly cited, it was not that corporations were not active. They were active, but they were apathetic to kind of citizens' general interest in terms of the application of surveillance technologies, not as an instrument to curb civil liberties, but hopefully as a conduit towards kind of further cultivating civil liberties. And so I've been thinking about what does it initially mean then to begin to include society, and which society is another kind of basic question that one could ask. Exactly what are we inviting? Is it simply civil society organizations, or are we organizing schools? Which kinds of schools are being represented? And within my own kind of given research context, what has been particularly evident is that really, very few civil society organizations have really been somewhat activated to kind of further participate in, not simply the regulation of these technologies, but also the general application. And so, kind of going back to your extended metaphor of the bridge, I would hope that all of us can cross it together.
Excellent, thank you very much. Have you actually? I'm sticking with you, by the way. Have you seen applications in your field of studies that went well, where you say that's exemplary?
Sure, they are. In some of the work that I'm particularly doing now on data protection in Kenya, what has been most interesting is seeing how the kind of the recently established data protection commissioner has been quite active in not only simply promoting data protection, but simply and also in really aiming to use it as an instrument to curb the general excesses of the application of these technologies. Obviously, the data commissioner in a country like Kenya is quite young. I think they're about to reach 2 in the next couple of months. And they've really spent the first year really a branding campaign to tell the citizenry, oh, by the way, we're an actual institution. Many kind of general skeptics within the academy and within kind of civil society initially assumed that the application of the data commissioner was just simply a KPI for the government. Many of my colleagues, would usually, be rather pessimistic about their work. But, talking to many of them, it seemed to me quite clear that they believe not only in what they're doing, but also in how they can necessarily support, human flourishing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, can I?
I wanted to turn to you anyway, so I mean, you can have the floor. Go ahead.
No, I just want to answer this question. Basically, who will cross the bridge? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Normally, what happens when we want to go for negotiation? It's not happening first time. So in negotiation, the party who are in more need, they normally take the first step. Okay. So who is in the first need right now? Yeah. The governments. I think first we need to understand that governments are equally responsible for this problem, because most of the governments in developing, even in developed countries, knowingly or unknowingly, intentionally or unintentionally, they are using these technologies for surveillance and for some other objectives. Okay, so it's like difficult to say whether the government will take this stand. Second, can we really give the full trust to our government that the rules and regulations which they are creating in that particular environment, are they really helping people or helping the government or some vested stakeholders? It's like a regulatory hijacking. Okay, so this is very common in developing countries or even in developed countries. It's very common in US basically, and not in Europe. So this regulatory hijack can be a big issue. Okay, so we need to see this problem in a very holistic manner. It's not like the government is a good guy, corporates are bad guy, and these people are victim. This is a very simple story, but it's not that simple. Okay, it's not that simple. People are victim, no doubt, but governments are not good because they are using this technology, as you said, that in Africa, I think, like how many countries are using the surveillance technology? More than
Well, about 12 or 13.
yeah, 12 and 13. In India, we are using, like, we are during this pandemic, the entire data of Indian citizens, like 1.4 billion people, now is with the Indian government. So though they know exactly what we are doing, and this data privacy law, they have given clear-cut exemption to government agencies. So the intention of the government is still, I think we need to doubt it now. We used to think that governments are friendly, they want to make good laws for us, they are caring. No, not anymore. Because governments are not purely governments anymore. They are having vested interest groups within the governments. So my hypothesis is that now this is a time that the normal people, and they are very powerful now. So let's assume a situation after 2 years or 3 years, people, they don't like Google, for example. They say, no, Google is abusing its dominant position. Google is doing something wrong. And then there is a movement of young people, and they found a new technology replacing Google. It's an open source technology. And within 6 months, you can see a big challenge to the Google on their entire foundation of their business strategies, which the all governments in Europe, US, and other parts of the world, they could not create that situation. The young people, by using the technology itself on the Google or some other things, they can create that situation. So, do we require that type of situation in future? Are the corporates are anticipating that thing, or our governments are anticipating the situation that people will revolt and they say, no, we don't want your surveillance system? And that's very much possible now. So I think it's not a bridge between the, who will cross first. I think here that first let's define who is doing what. Okay. I think the parties, their stakeholders, we need to define again. Let's make this story a little bit complex. That victim is well defined, hero and villain is not properly defined. Okay. So once we have that discussion, because we don't want that bad people collaborate with each other and then they create more nuisance and more problems for common people. So I think it's a time that we need to think beyond government and beyond even the international organizations. Okay, because I don't think that they will be able to create some strong rules and regulation in terms of technologies. Okay, so I think this is a time that we need to give more power to common people and the young generation, especially in 20s, 30s. I think those are the people who are using these technologies. They understand these technologies. we need to make them stakeholders in this process.
You're almost kicking off the discussion now that the time is almost over already, and we have to go to a few questions that the room or the chat room may have, because otherwise, I mean, I would have asked you how can we organize the ordinary people in such a way that they can actually have a voice. So now I turn to the room and ask whether anybody has a question to ask our expert panelists, or yes, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I had a question for Antonella, actually. I thought it was very interesting, this notion of policy sandboxing. I think the challenge in particular here is that we're trying to develop the future of these technologies, right? So how do you do sandboxing for long-term develops rather than short-term wording or something like this?
Very, very interesting question. So I think for now we are focusing on AI and the models and the existing technologies, but the added value of policy prototyping and something that we are working on is how to make them more, make them faster, so we can test policy and legal concept faster with companies. So as soon as we have a new issue, we can target that and ask our cohort of startups to reply to this question through policy prototyping sprints, we call them. So we are working to make this methodology a bit more flexible in order to cope with this problem.
Excellent. And I would like to give the opportunity for the chat moderators to post a question. Is there a question that you can share with us?
There is a question online. We can just quickly jump in.
Yes, please.
Thanks for the great discussion, of course. Just a question from, sorry, from the audience online. First for Antonella. As you have mentioned, the integration of startups to your regulatory experiments, to what extent and how do you also integrate the demand side, those consumers, civil society groups, into both the design and the development of this kind of a regulatory framework? And for all whoever is kind of want to answer it, is what key features should be adopted in the process of developing AI policy to reach, of course, an efficient, positive societal outcome while taking into account the stakeholder perspective. And those are concretely the questions from Mrs. Silva, which is Valerie Silva, Professor of International Law and Regulatory Expert at the Business School from Paris. Thanks.
Thank you. So it really depends on the program, but I can reply by saying that in the co-creation phase, so when we develop the policy prototype, for instance, in Mexico, we partnered with the Mexican DPA and we developed from scratch a transparency and explainability framework. In that phase, we included the consortium members, which can be academics, civil society representatives, and the policymaker in that case. So those are the people that help co-design, and then companies are the one testing. So this is how we see the process. It's a multi-stakeholder, but stakeholders can work on the prototype in different phases. And then, for instance, in Europe, at the moment, we are running workshops and roundtable and a sandbox jam in which we will reflect with experts and technical, for instance, engineers and policymakers to improve the implementing act of the AI sandbox that is proposed by the European Commission. So to have a full reply, we're organizing stakeholders and engaging stakeholders at different stages of the programs. And when it comes to consumers, yeah, this is a very early and young program, let's say. And recently we started engaging with the end users and consumers by testing these obligations on transparency from the AI Act. So we plan to involve consumers and end users more in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, time is up. I wish to thank Jan for his contribution online, Amar as well, who's left us already. Thank you very much, Antonella, Bulelani, and Avinash. Just a few heads up. The next up is a coffee break from 10:40 to 11 o'clock. At 11 o'clock sharp, as I've just been informed, at 11 o'clock sharp, we have a keynote from Eva Kaili from the European Parliament. All is left is to thank you very, very much for your attention. I wish you a good continuation of the conference. A big thank you to all. Thank you.